Dust hung in the air, thick and choking, rising from the ground every time a heavy boot stamped against it. The marketplace was crowded, voices colliding, echoing against stone walls. Merchants shouted prices of strange fruits, cages rattled as animals fought against their bars, and above all of it was laughter. Not the kind of laughter that came from joy, but sharp, cruel laughter. In the center stood a raised platform, surrounded by aliens of different shapes and sizes, all pressing closer to watch what was happening. On that platform, chains clinked with every movement of the alien woman. Her skin shimmered faintly, a pale silver that reflected the harsh light of the twin suns. She was tall, though her posture was bent from exhaustion. Bruises covered her arms, her lips were cracked and dry, and her eyes, large, dark, and filled with despair, scanned the crowd. She did not plead anymore. She had done that before, and it had only made the laughter louder. The rule was simple: 1 coin, 1 whip. That was the game. The crowd had turned her suffering into sport. The Baron, the master of this market, stood at the edge of the platform, grinning as the coins clattered into a large bowl. Each time a coin was tossed in, the whip cracked against her back. She flinched, staggered, but never screamed. That, in fact, seemed to anger the crowd even more. They wanted her to cry, to break. Their jeers grew louder when she bit her lip and stood silent. "Cowardly beast! Make her scream!" one shouted. "Another coin! I'll pay for another!" The whipmaster raised his arm high, the leather strip curling like a serpent, ready to strike. The sound echoed, sharp and merciless, and the woman's body jerked as it tore into her skin. A red line bloomed across her back. A few in the crowd cheered, tossing more coins, as if her pain was the best bargain they could buy. From the shadows of the marketplace, half hidden by a line of merchants, stood a human. He had been traveling through this alien city, unseen, unimportant. His clothes were plain, worn from weeks on the road, and his face was hidden beneath the edge of his hood. He had not planned to stop here. He had not planned to get involved. But his eyes stayed locked on the platform, on her. Her gaze, wandering in hopelessness, met his for a heartbeat. It was not long, just a flicker, but it was enough. He saw the raw plea in those eyes. She did not ask for rescue. She had no hope left for that. She only wanted it to end. That single look burned into him like fire. The whip cracked again. Another coin dropped. Another wound opened across her back. The sound of laughter seemed to stretch, to echo, filling the air until it felt like a storm pressing against his ears. His fists clenched. His jaw tightened. He told himself to turn away. It was not his fight. It was not his world. Yet every strike that landed made his chest heavier, until it was hard to breathe. The crowd chanted the cruel rhythm of the game. $1, 1 whip. $1, 1 whip. Over and over, like a song of torment. The Baron laughed, his gold rings flashing as he raised the bowl higher, showing off the wealth earned from her pain. The woman staggered, her knees nearly buckling, but somehow she stayed upright. A soft breath escaped her lips, more like a sigh than a voice. She turned her face slightly, once more searching the crowd. Again, her eyes found his. This time there was no plea, only a quiet acceptance, as if telling him silently, "This is my end." The human's heart pounded. He felt the weight of his single coin in his pocket. It was all he had left from his last trade. 1 coin, useless for food, useless for travel. 1 coin that meant nothing. Yet in this place, 1 coin meant a strike, a wound, more suffering. His fingers closed around it tightly. The whip lifted again. The crowd leaned forward, ready to see her body flinch, ready to hear what they wanted most, a scream. But before the whip could fall, a sharp clink echoed in the silence. A coin, small and ordinary, rolled across the wooden boards of the platform and stopped at the feet of the whipmaster. The crowd cheered, thinking another blow had been purchased. But then they saw who had thrown it. A human, a stranger, a weak, unimportant figure stepping out of the shadows. He did not raise his hand for violence, did not shout for her pain. He simply stared at the woman, his coin lying on the stage like a challenge. The whipmaster sneered, confused. $1, 1 whip, he shouted again, as if to remind this outsider of the rule. But the human shook his head. Slowly, clearly, he spoke, his voice carrying across the silent market. $1, no more whips. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The Baron's grin faltered, his eyes narrowing. The whip hung motionless in the master's hand. The alien woman blinked, her lips parting slightly as if she could not believe what she had heard. For the first time in 13 years of cruelty, someone had spoken not to hurt her, but to stop the pain. Silence stretched across the market, heavy and dangerous. The crowd leaned closer, waiting to see what would happen next. The whip trembled in the master's grip. The human stood tall, his eyes locked on the woman, and everyone understood. The game had just changed. The crowd stood frozen for a moment, the silence heavier than stone. They could not believe what they had just heard. A human, one of the weakest races in the galaxy, had dared to speak against the rule of the market. For years, no one had ever questioned the law of the Baron. One coin, one whip. That was how it always had been. And yet, here stood this stranger, his voice calm but filled with iron, declaring, $1, no more whips. The whip master snarled, his sharp teeth flashing. His arm twitched as if ready to strike again, but the human stare was steady, unwavering. The woman on the platform turned her head slowly toward him. Her lips trembled, but no sound came. It was as though her body did not believe the words he had spoken, afraid it might all be a cruel trick. From the crowd came the first laugh. Harsh, mocking, like the bark of an animal. Others joined until it swelled into a sea of laughter. They pointed at the human, shaking their heads. "A weakling! Look at him! He thinks he can change the game?" shouted one. Another tossed a coin in the air and caught it again. "He will be whipped next." The Baron leaned forward from his seat, his grin stretched wide. His golden robe shimmered under the light. He loved this. Nothing entertained him more than a fool who thought he could stand against power. "So," he said in a voice thick with mockery, "the human wants to buy mercy. A mistake, stranger. Mercy costs more than you can pay." But the human did not back down. Slowly, he walked forward, stepping into the circle around the platform. His boots crunched in the dust. Every eye followed him, every laugh turning into murmurs of disbelief. No one stopped him, though. No one moved to push him away. His presence alone seemed to still them. He climbed the wooden steps, one hand brushing against the rough boards, and came to stand in front of the chained woman. The whipmaster moved to block him, towering over him. His thick arms rippled with muscle, his face twisted in anger. "You dare tell me when to strike?" he hissed. His whip lifted, curling like a living serpent. The air grew tense. The crowd leaned forward as one, waiting to see the human torn apart. But before the whip could fall, the human's hand shot out. Fingers closed around the leather strip mid-swing, catching it in the air. The crack that should have split her skin never came. The sound of leather snapping was replaced by the silence of disbelief. Gasps exploded from the crowd. The whipmaster blinked, shocked, staring at his whip trapped in the grip of a human. The human's voice was quiet, but it carried, cutting through the silence like a blade. Enough. The woman's eyes widened. She had seen strong aliens fall under that whip, warriors larger than this human brought to their knees. Yet here he stood, holding it as though it were nothing more than rope. For the first time, her heart beat with something dangerous. Hope. The whipmaster roared in fury, jerking back, trying to tear the weapon free. The human did not let go. Muscles strained in his arm, veins rising, but his grip stayed like iron. The crowd's jeers turned to shouts. Some screamed for blood, others chanted for the whip to strike harder. The Baron's grin faltered slightly, his eyes narrowing. He had expected the human to be crushed instantly. This was different. This was dangerous. Finally, the whipmaster lunged forward, using all his strength. The human twisted his wrist, and the leather slipped from the master's hand. The whip coiled at his feet. Gasps spread like fire through the crowd. A human had just disarmed one of the Baron's chosen men. That had never happened before. The silence lasted only a heartbeat before chaos erupted. Several guards stepped forward, weapons drawn. The crowd screamed, some in excitement, some in fury. The Baron stood, his robe swirling, his face now hard and cold. "Kill him!" he bellowed. The human did not flinch. He bent slowly, picked up the whip, and let it hang loosely in his hand. His eyes flicked to the woman, who was staring at him as if he were unreal. She whispered something in her alien tongue, too soft to hear, but her lips trembled with life again. The first guard rushed at him, a massive alien with tusks protruding from his jaw. The human stepped aside, swinging the whip. The crack split the air, sharp and violent, striking the guard across the chest. The alien roared in shock, stumbling back. The crowd howled with noise, their excitement surging higher than ever. More guards advanced, circling him. The human's breath came steady, his body tense but not trembling. He knew he could not win forever. He knew he was only one man against an army. But he also knew one thing with certainty. He would not let them touch her again. The woman pulled against her chains, her eyes wide as she watched. Each movement of his whip, each defiant stand, shattered the hopelessness that had lived inside her for years. Around them, the market seemed to shake with the weight of this moment. The old rule was breaking. The Baron's voice thundered above the noise. Tear him apart! But the human only tightened his grip, the leather coiled around his fist, his stance steady on the platform. His eyes locked not on the Baron, not on the guards, but on the broken woman beside him. And in that gaze, she saw a promise. The crowd leaned closer, the air thick with hunger for blood and shock at what they were witnessing. They had come to see pain. They had come to laugh. Instead, they were seeing something no coin could buy: defiance. The human raised the whip higher, his chest rising and falling, ready for the storm. The moment stretched, heavy with suspense, and everyone knew this was no longer just a game. It was a battle, and the human had just declared it. The first guard lunged forward, a towering alien with skin like stone and arms as thick as tree trunks. His tusks gleamed under the harsh light as he swung a heavy iron club toward the human's head. The crowd roared, expecting the fight to end in one brutal blow. But the human ducked low, the club whistling past his skull. Dust rose as he rolled across the boards, quick and sharp like a predator, then snapped the whip across the guard's back. The sound cracked through the air, sharp as lightning, and the giant alien howled in pain, stumbling forward. Gasps burst from the crowd. A human had struck a warrior of the Baron. That had never been seen before. The woman on the platform blinked through her tears, her breath caught in her throat. She had seen countless beings broken on this stage, all larger, all stronger than this lone man. But this time was different. This time, the whip was in human hands. Two more guards advanced together, one armed with a spear tipped with jagged bone, the other with a curved blade glowing faintly with energy. They moved in sync, trained killers who had ended many lives before. The human stepped back, his boots sliding in the dust. His chest rose and fell fast, sweat beating at his brow, but his eyes stayed locked on theirs. He was afraid. Yes, but fear did not stop him. The spear thrust forward. The human twisted his body to the side, the blade missing his chest by inches. He lashed out with the whip, wrapping it around the shaft of the spear, then yanked hard. The alien holding it growled as the weapon tore from his grip and clattered to the ground. The second guard slashed downward with the curved blade, aiming to split him in two. The human barely moved in time, the blade slicing through the edge of his cloak. Sparks flew as it bit into the wooden boards instead of flesh. The human drove his shoulder forward, slamming into the alien's chest. The larger warrior staggered back, and the human struck with the butt of the whip handle, cracking it against his jaw. The alien crashed to the ground, his blade falling from his grip. The crowd screamed louder, the air filled with chaos, some cheering, others demanding blood. The woman's heart pounded, her chains rattling as she pulled against them. Her lips parted in awe, her breath shuddering. She could not understand it. Why was this human risking everything for her? She had been beaten, mocked, left to rot, and yet this stranger stood like a wall between her and the cruelty of the world. The whipmaster himself stepped forward now, fury burning in his eyes. His arms bulged as he drew a second whip from his belt, its tips tipped with metal shards. He cracked it once, the sound echoing like thunder. The human stared at him, chest heaving, blood running down his arm where the blade had grazed him. The wound stung, but his grip did not weaken. The whipmaster struck, fast as lightning. The human raised his own whip, the two leather cords colliding mid-air with a sharp crack. Again and again, they struck at each other, the air filled with the snapping sound of battle. The crowd screamed with every clash, their eyes wide at the impossible sight. A human fighting the master of whips on equal ground. But the whipmaster was stronger. His strikes drove the human back step by step, the boards creaking under their boots. The woman cried out softly as she saw the human's arm tremble. Another strike landed, tearing across his shoulder. He gritted his teeth, refusing to fall, but his blood splattered against the boards. The Baron laughed from his seat, his golden rings glittering as he clapped. "Break him! Break the human! Show him mercy is a lie!" His voice rolled like a storm, fueling the crowd's bloodlust. The human staggered but did not fall. He swung his whip in a wide arc, catching the whipmaster's weapon and twisting it. The crowd gasped as, for a single moment, the master lost control. The human's fist shot forward, striking the alien square in the jaw. The whipmaster stumbled back, dazed. The crowd fell into silence, then erupted with screams louder than before. The woman's eyes filled with tears, but not of pain, of shock, of something she had not felt in years. Hope. But more guards surged forward now, a dozen of them, their weapons gleaming. The human stood in the center of the platform, whip in one hand, blood dripping down his other. His chest heaved with exhaustion, but his eyes stayed sharp, refusing to leave the woman's face. He knew he was surrounded. He knew he could not win forever. Still, he planted his feet firmly against the wood. He would not take a step back. He would not abandon her to this nightmare. The guards encircled him, their growls rising, weapons raised. The Baron's grin widened, certain the end was near. The human tightened his grip on the whip, his knuckles white. His heart thundered in his chest, but his mind was clear. He was not fighting for glory. He was not fighting for riches. He was fighting because one glance into the woman's broken eyes had shown him the truth. No one deserved this cruelty. And if no one else would stand, then he would. The first guard rushed him, then the second, and the platform exploded into chaos once more. The human ducked, twisted, struck, his body moving with desperation and fire. Every blow he gave was matched with one he received. His lip split, his ribs ached, blood poured from fresh wounds. But he did not fall. The woman's chains rattled as she cried out, straining against the metal, her voice trembling with desperation. The crowd roared, drunk on the spectacle, torn between awe and rage. Dust swirled, blood splattered, and the human kept fighting, one against many, weak against strong, and still he stood. Blood dripped from his lip, warm and metallic on his tongue, but the human refused to fall. His knees wobbled, his chest burned with every breath, yet his eyes remained sharp. The guards circled him, snarling, weapons gleaming under the suns. Each strike they landed tore his skin, each hit rattled his bones, but each time he rose again, pushing against the tide like a stubborn flame in the wind. The alien woman, chained and bleeding, could barely watch. Her body trembled. Her lips moved silently, as though praying to gods she no longer believed in. She had seen warriors far stronger than this human broken in moments, yet he stood after endless strikes. Hope and fear twisted together in her chest until she could hardly breathe. The crowd no longer laughed. Their mocking cheers had turned to tense murmurs. Some whispered in disbelief, others shook their heads angrily. They had come for entertainment, for the cruel game of one coin and one whip. Instead, they were watching a human, weak in their eyes, defy the rules of the market. It unsettled them, like watching a small fire spread through dry grass. The Baron's face tightened. His grin was gone now, replaced by a dark scowl. His jeweled fingers gripped the edge of his throne as he leaned forward. He could not allow this to continue. If one man could resist, if one man could stand against his cruelty, what would stop others from doing the same? His rule was built on fear, and here was a stranger who spat in its face. The Baron raised his hand. At once the crowd grew silent. Even the guards paused. Then, with a gesture, he commanded the whipmaster to step forward. This was no longer a spectacle. It was a lesson. The whipmaster was no ordinary guard. He was the executioner of this place, feared even among the Baron's men. His arms bulged with muscle, his face twisted in rage from the humiliation of losing his whip earlier. Now he carried a new one, longer, thicker, tipped with cruel shards of iron. The human's chest heaved as he wiped the blood from his face with the back of his hand. He stood straighter, though his body screamed to collapse. His eyes flicked briefly to the woman. She stared back, her tears shimmering. She whispered something in her tongue, a fragile sound, lost in the heavy silence. It might have been a plea for him to stop, or a prayer that he survive. The whipmaster stepped into the circle, his weapon dragging along the boards with a hiss. He lifted it high, and the crowd erupted into cheers once more. They smelled blood. They wanted an ending. The whip cracked down with a sound like thunder. The human raised his arm too slow to block it. Pain ripped across his back as the iron tips tore through flesh. His body arched, his teeth clenched, but no scream escaped his lips. The woman flinched as though the strike had landed on her own skin. Another strike came, faster, harder. The human staggered, his knees nearly buckling, but again he forced himself upright. His chest heaved as blood streamed down his side. The crowd roared at the sight of Crimson, their voices a storm of hunger and excitement. Still, he did not fall. He did not beg. He stood, breathing raggedly, fists clenched at his side. The whipmaster sneered, striking again. This time, the human caught the leather mid-air, his fingers clamping down despite the burning pain. Blood trickled between his knuckles as the shards tore into his palm, but he refused to release it. Gasps shot through the crowd. With a sudden yank, he pulled the whip toward him, dragging the master off balance. The alien stumbled forward, his massive body crashing against the boards. The human swung his fist into the master's jaw, a crack echoing as the giant reeled back. For a moment, silence fell again. The Baron's eyes narrowed dangerously. His authority was cracking like the wood beneath their boots. He slammed his fist onto his throne and shouted, "End this! Break him now!" The guards surged forward again, but the woman let out a sound, small, desperate, yet sharp enough to cut through the chaos. It was not a scream of fear. It was a cry of hope. Her lips trembled, whispering words like a mantra, urging him to rise, to keep fighting. The human's body swayed, his vision blurred, but that sound anchored him. He tightened his grip on the whip he had stolen, raising it once more. His body shook, but his stance was unbroken. The crowd leaned forward, their voices tangled with both awe and rage. They had expected a quick death. Instead, they were watching defiance incarnate. The whip master roared in fury, charging again. The human sidestepped, snapping the whip across the master's face. Blood sprayed, and the giant stumbled, clutching his eye. The crowd erupted into chaos, some cheering wildly, others screaming for the human's death. The woman's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes widened as she saw him, bloodied and battered, yet still standing, still refusing to let go. For the first time in years, her tears were not of despair. They were of something dangerous, something alive. The Baron stood now, his voice thunderous over the chaos. "Enough! Kill him! Kill them both if you must! But no one leaves this stage alive!" His robe shimmered, his rings gleamed, but his voice cracked with anger. He was no longer amused. He was afraid. The guards tightened their circle. Weapons rose. The human's chest heaved, his arms heavy as stone, yet his eyes never left the woman's. She met his gaze, and in that silent exchange, a promise was made. The whip hung loosely in his bleeding hand, his body swaying under the weight of exhaustion. He knew he might not survive. He knew death was close. But still, he planted his feet, ready for whatever storm was coming. And as the next wave of enemies stepped forward, the crowd held its breath. They no longer watched for a scream, no longer for a coin's worth of pain. They watched for the impossible, to see if the human would rise again. The whip slipped from the master's hand and landed with a heavy thud on the wooden boards. The crowd gasped, their voices caught between awe and fear. For the first time in years, the weapon of punishment lay in the dirt, not in control of the Baron's men, but in the grip of a human. Blood streamed down the man's arm, his hand raw from the shards embedded in the leather, but his grip did not loosen. His chest rose and fell with the weight of battle, and his eyes burned with a fire no one there had ever seen. The whipmaster staggered back, clutching his swollen jaw, his rage boiling over. But before he could strike again, the human raised the whip high and cracked it through the air. The sound exploded like a storm, sharper, louder, more violent than when the master himself had wielded it. The crowd flinched. For the first time, the weapon was not used against the weak, but against the oppressors. The human swung again, this time striking the nearest guard across the chest. The alien roared in shock as the whip tore through armor, leaving a long gash that bled freely. Another guard lunged forward, only to be met with the whip snapping across his face, sending him stumbling back with a howl. The market fell into chaos. What had started as a cruel game was turning into rebellion, all sparked by one man. The woman's eyes widened as her chains rattled against the post. She had dreamed of freedom for years, but had never believed it possible. Yet here was a human, bloodied and broken, standing with a whip in his hands like a warrior from forgotten legends. Her lips parted, trembling, whispering his name, though she did not even know it. The Baron rose from his seat, his golden robe flowing as his fury spilled across the arena. His voice boomed like thunder, silencing the noise for an instant. "This ends now! Bring out the elites!" His command rolled across the marketplace, and the crowd cheered and screamed in a frenzy, desperate to see the human crushed. From the far side of the platform, the elite guards stepped forward. They were larger, stronger, their armor thick and gleaming. Each carried weapons of war, forged not for shows, but for killing. The ground shook under their boots as they advanced. The human tightened his grip on the whip, his breath heavy, but he did not step back. The first elite swung a massive axe, the blade gleaming under the sun. The human dodged just in time, the weapon slamming into the wood and splintering it apart. He snapped the whip across the alien's wrist, forcing him to drop the axe with a roar of pain. The human kicked it aside, but the second elite was already upon him, a blade slicing across his side. Blood poured, staining his torn shirt, yet he did not fall. He struck back, the whip lashing across the alien's exposed neck, leaving a deep red line. The crowd's voices clashed, some screaming for the human's death, others too stunned to speak. For the first time, fear flickered in their eyes. If a human could fight the elites, then maybe the Baron's power was not unbreakable. The woman's breath came in sharp bursts as she pulled against her chains harder than before. Her wrists bled, but she did not stop. Hope surged in her chest. Hope that maybe she would not die here, that maybe the stranger's defiance could truly change her fate. The human's movements slowed, his body heavy with blood loss and exhaustion. But with every strike he gave, something shifted in the air. The market was no longer just a stage of cruelty. It had become a battlefield. And in that battlefield, the human stood at its heart, refusing to let the darkness win. The whip cracked again, this time tearing across the back of the whipmaster himself. The giant roared, spinning in rage, but the human met his charge head-on. Their struggle shook the boards, fists and whips colliding, blood spraying into the dust. The human's fist connected with the master's jaw once more, sending him sprawling across the stage. The crowd fell into stunned silence, their eyes wide. The Baron's face twisted in fury. His voice broke through the silence, louder than ever. "Enough! Kill the woman! If she dies, his fight dies with her!" The woman's eyes widened in terror as one of the elites turned toward her, his blade lifting high. Her body froze, her lips trembling with fear. The human's heart pounded as he saw it, his chest filling with fire. With a roar that cut through the chaos, he hurled himself across the stage, his whip snapping around the alien's wrist. The blade clattered to the ground, and the human slammed into the guard with everything he had left. They crashed to the boards in a storm of fists and fury. The woman gasped, her tears spilling freely. Her body shook as she realized the truth. He was not fighting for glory or survival. He was fighting for her. Every strike he endured, every drop of blood he lost, was for the chance to see her free. The Baron's command grew frantic. More guards swarmed forward, the air alive with the clash of metal and the cries of pain. The human staggered, his knees threatening to give, but his will burned stronger. He raised the whip again, striking with desperate strength, refusing to let the woman fall. The crowd no longer chanted. They no longer laughed. They watched, silent and tense, caught between the power of the Baron and the impossible defiance of the human. Whispers spread like sparks. He stands against them all. A human fights the Baron's men. What if he wins? The Baron shouted louder, his voice cracking, his power slipping like sand through his fingers. The human, battered and drenched in blood, stood tall, whip in hand, facing the elites without fear. The woman's breath trembled as she whispered through her chains, "Please, don't fall." And in that moment, as the elites closed in again, the human's eyes met hers. In his gaze, there was no surrender, only a promise. Whatever the cost, he would not let her die here. The platform shook under the weight of boots as more guards rushed forward. The human stood with the whip in his hand, his body swaying from blood loss and exhaustion, but his spirit burned hotter than fire. His shirt was torn, his chest heaving, his skin streaked with crimson. Every breath tasted like iron, but he refused to let go. His eyes stayed fixed on the chained woman, as if her life alone anchored him to the world. One guard leapt at him with a jagged spear. The human snapped the whip with all his strength. The sharp crack split the air, curling around the spear and yanking it out of the guard's hand. Before the alien could recover, the human slammed his boot into his chest, sending him sprawling off the platform. The crowd gasped, some cheering wildly, others trembling at the sight. For them, this was no longer a show. It was rebellion, dangerous and alive. The Baron bellowed from his throne, spittle flying from his lips. "End him! Do not let that beast stand another second." His golden rings clattered as he pounded his armrest, his fury filling the market like thunder. The guards obeyed, but even as they swarmed, the human kept fighting. His movements were slower now, heavy and desperate, but every strike counted. Every swing of the whip tore through armor, every kick and punch landed with the weight of his will. Behind him, the woman struggled against her chains with renewed strength. Her wrists bled, but she no longer cared. She had lived too long in despair, too long in silence. Now, watching this human bleed for her, something inside her broke free. She pulled with all her might, the iron biting into her skin. Her voice trembled as she whispered in her tongue, over and over, words of hope and fire. The human stumbled as a sword cut across his back. He gritted his teeth, his body arching in pain, but he turned with a roar and slammed his fist into the alien's face. The guard crumpled, his weapon clattering uselessly to the floor. The human picked it up, a jagged blade heavy in his bloody hand. For the first time, he was armed. The crowd fell into a hush. The sight of a human, holding the weapon of their guards, standing tall despite his wounds, struck them with awe. Some began to whisper, their words spreading like sparks on dry grass. "He fights like no other. The human does not fall. What if the Baron can be broken?" Fear seeped into the air, and even the Baron himself felt it, his lips curling in unease. The human turned, his chest heaving, and looked at the woman again. Her eyes met his, wide and trembling. For a heartbeat, the noise of the crowd faded. In that gaze, he saw not just a victim but a survivor waiting to rise. With the jagged blade in one hand and the whip in the other, he stepped toward her chains. The nearest guard lunged to stop him, but the human lashed out. The whip wrapped around the alien's throat, yanked tight, and pulled him off his feet. The human kicked him aside without hesitation, then raised the blade high. Sparks flew as he struck the first chain. It did not break, but it cracked. The woman gasped, tears spilling down her face. Another guard charged, but the woman, weak and bleeding, suddenly moved. She kicked out with her bound legs, tripping the alien. He crashed to the boards, and the human finished him with a strike of the whip. For the first time, they had fought together. The human swung the blade again, this time with all his strength. The chain snapped, the broken metal falling to the ground. The woman's right arm came free. She gasped, clutching the broken shackle, her wrist raw and bleeding. Her heart pounded in disbelief. After years of chains, she was free. The Baron roared in fury, his voice breaking. "No, do not let her escape! Kill them both!" His guards surged forward, but the woman grabbed the fallen alien's weapon with her free hand. It was heavy, far too heavy for her weakened body, but she raised it anyway. The human looked at her, their eyes meeting for a single moment of understanding. Side by side, they would fight. The guards clashed against them, the platform erupting into chaos. The human struck with the whip, the blade flashing in his other hand, his body moving with desperation. The woman swung her stolen weapon clumsily but fiercely, forcing back the enemies who came too close. Her arms trembled, her strength failing, but the fire in her chest kept her standing. The crowd no longer laughed, no longer jeered. They watched in silence, their eyes wide, their hearts trembling with the impossible sight. Chains breaking. A woman rising. A human defying the Baron himself. The whispers grew louder. They fight together. The human freed her. The Baron cannot stop them. The human cut through another chain, sparks flying. The woman cried out as her other arm came free. She staggered forward, no longer bound, her body trembling with freedom. She looked down at her wrists, at the blood and broken iron, and her tears flowed freely. She was no longer a prisoner. Together, they stood in the center of the stage, weapons in hand, bloodied and battered but unbroken. The guards circled them, but hesitation flickered in their eyes. None had ever faced such defiance before. None had ever seen the chains fall in front of the crowd. The Baron screamed, his voice cracking with rage. "Kill them! Kill them now!" But his words rang hollow, like a man shouting against a storm. The crowd no longer echoed him. They only watched, silent and spellbound. The human raised his whip once more, his body shaking, but his stance unyielding. The woman lifted her stolen blade, her breath trembling, but her eyes fierce. For the first time, she stood not as a victim, but as a fighter. And as the guards hesitated, as the Baron raged, the truth became clear. The market was no longer his stage of cruelty. It was theirs, and they would burn it to the ground before surrendering. Flames licked the edge of the market as chaos spread through the crowd. Stalls overturned, coins scattered, and cages rattled as creatures inside howled in fear. The once laughing audience now screamed, their cheers replaced with panic. Some fled, shoving through the narrow alleys, while others stayed frozen, unable to look away from the human and the freed woman standing tall in the center of the platform. The human's body was battered and soaked in blood. His breaths came sharp and ragged, each one like fire in his chest. His clothes hung in torn strips, his knuckles raw, his arms heavy from the whip and blade he carried. Yet his eyes burned with unshakable defiance. He looked more like a man carved from stone than flesh, a figure who would not bow. Beside him stood the alien woman, her chains shattered, her wrists still bleeding. The blade in her hands shook from weakness, but her stance was firm. For the first time in her life, she was not caged. The guards circled, but hesitation clouded their faces. They had always been feared. Their armor, their weapons, their cruelty had always been enough to control the crowd. But now they faced something different. Two broken souls, standing together, unafraid. Every guard knew that striking forward meant becoming part of this storm, and fear crept into their eyes. The Baron, towering from his throne, screamed in fury. His voice cracked like a whip as he roared. "Cowards! Crush them! Do not let them leave this place alive!" His golden robe shimmered as he pointed a jeweled hand at the stage. "If you fail me, you will burn with them." The command forced the guards forward. One leapt first, swinging a heavy axe at the human. The man twisted, barely dodging, then lashed the whip across the alien's face. Blood sprayed as the guard collapsed. Another rushed at the woman, thinking her the weaker one, but she lifted her stolen blade and thrust forward with desperate strength. The weapon pierced the alien's side, and he fell to his knees with a roar of pain. Her hands trembled, tears streaming down her cheeks, but she did not drop the blade. She had chosen to fight. The crowd gasped. Whispers spread like wildfire. "She fights with him." The human freed her. The Baron's rule is breaking. Fear crept into the voices, not for the woman or the human, but for the Baron himself. The Baron felt it too. His fingers twitched on the armrest, his eyes wild with rage. He could not let this moment live. If it spread beyond this market, if others heard of it, his power would crack. He signaled to his last defense, the black armored enforcers, his most loyal killers. They marched forward, their armor gleaming, their weapons charged with energy. The ground shook beneath their heavy boots. The human's knees nearly buckled at the sight of them. His body screamed to fall, to give up, but his eyes locked on the woman beside him. She clutched her blade tightly, her shoulders trembling. He saw her fear, but beneath it, he saw determination. She would not run. Neither would he. The first enforcer struck, swinging a glowing staff. The human met it with his whip, sparks exploding as leather struck energy. He twisted, pulling the weapon aside, then drove his fist into the enforcer's throat. The alien staggered, choking, and the woman slashed her blade across his leg, finishing the fight. Together, they dropped him. Another came from the side, aiming to strike the woman. The human blocked with his body, taking the blow across his ribs. Pain exploded through him, but he gritted his teeth, refusing to fall. The woman's scream tore through the air, and with a burst of strength, she drove her blade into the attacker's chest. Blood spilled across the boards as the alien collapsed. The crowd erupted, no longer just whispering, but shouting. Some screamed in support, others cried in fear, but all of them felt the same thing. The Baron's power was slipping. The Baron rose to his feet, his face twisted with rage. He drew a blade of his own, a weapon of black steel glowing faintly. The crowd hushed instantly. Never before had the Baron dirtied his hands in the arena. The sight alone filled them with dread. He pointed the blade at the human and the woman. "You dare defy me? You dare shame my court? Then you will die by my hand." The human's vision blurred, his knees shaking, but he tightened his grip on the whip and blade. He stepped forward, his body screaming in protest, but his voice rang clear. "No one will hurt her again." The Baron charged, his blade slashing with deadly precision. The human blocked with his weapon, sparks flying as steel met steel. The force drove him back, his boots skidding across the blood-stained boards. The woman tried to join the fight, but the Baron's strength was overwhelming. His strikes were like thunder, each one threatening to shatter the human's bones. But the human did not give up. Each time the Baron struck, he struck back. Each time he was knocked down, he rose again. The woman cried out his name, her voice trembling with desperation, urging him not to fall. The crowd watched in silence, breathless, as the impossible battle raged. Finally, with a roar, the human twisted his whip around the Baron's arm, yanking hard. The jeweled tyrant staggered, his blade swinging wide. The human seized the moment, slamming his stolen blade deep into the Baron's chest. The golden robe darkened with blood as the Baron gasped, his eyes wide with disbelief. The crowd screamed, some in horror, others in wild cheers. The Baron stumbled back, his mouth opening as if to curse, but no sound came. He collapsed onto his throne, the weight of his power crashing down with him. Silence fell, heavy and sharp, broken only by the crackling of flames around the market. The human dropped the blade, his body swaying. The woman rushed to his side, catching him as his knees buckled. Her tears soaked his shoulder as she whispered, "Why? Why would you fight for me?" His eyes, half closed from exhaustion, met hers. His voice was weak but steady, because $1 should never buy pain. Together, they stepped down from the platform, the crowd parting in silence. Whispers followed them, whispers that would spread across worlds. A human had stood against the Baron, and the Baron had fallen. The woman leaned against him, her chains gone, her steps unsteady but free. Behind them, the market burned. The old law of cruelty was ash and smoke. Ahead of them lay uncertainty, perhaps even more battles, but also something brighter than either of them had known before: hope.